Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Brookings, whether you're with us here in Falk Auditorium on Massachusetts Avenue or you're joining us online from wherever you may be. My name is Alan Berube. I currently serve as the Vice President and Director of Brookings Metro. The short version about Brookings Metro, since I think we want to get into the program, is that we're the team at Brookings that focuses most intently on what's happening in America outside of the Beltway. And it's in that regard that we're very happy to be convening today's event in collaboration with Revolution. Both of our organizations share a particular interest in, and I think passion for, fostering economic opportunity in more of America's communities across more of the national map. So the moment that brings us together today then is some version of what would you do if all your dreams came true? Which is a little bit of an exaggeration, but we're seeing this combination, I think, of new market forces, of intentional investment strategies, and supportive public policies that are combining to stimulate what Revolution Chairman and CEO Steve Case has long called the rise of the rest. Just as one data point, we're Brookings, I got to give you a data point. So my colleague Mark Miro, who we'll hear from later, he published a new report this week, finds that the share of tech jobs in the traditional superstar metro areas like the Bay Area, Boston, Los Angeles, and New York has actually dipped in the last couple of years, while the share of those jobs in Austin and Dallas, Denver, Salt Lake, and Miami is actually on the rise. And so with that type of success comes new questions, in some cases new challenges in labor markets and housing markets, and of course in how those two markets interact. So that's what we're here to unpack today. We have two terrific panels of national and local experts, public sector leaders here with us. My Brookings Metro colleague Jennyschutz is going to facilitate the first of those panels. She's one of the key housing policy experts, not just at Brookings, but in America today. And my colleague Mark will facilitate the second. He's an expert on regional economic growth and innovation. We will have a short reception afterward. But to kick things off, we're so pleased to welcome Revolution Chairman and CEO Steve Case. Steve will engage in a conversation with Stephanie Hughes, who you probably know from Marketplace on your local public radio station, if not by sight, then by sound. So thank you both for being with us, and over to you, Stephanie.
Hi, everybody. Excited to be here. Hi, Steve. All right. So I'm Stephanie Hughes, a senior reporter for the public radio show Marketplace. I'm here with Steve Case, CEO of Revolution, a venture capital firm based here in Washington. Steve's also known as the co-founder of America Online, and he's now a big proponent of investing in startups around America, specifically those outside of traditional tech hubs. He's gone on a big bus tour where he's visited a bunch of these cities. He's raised 2 venture funds dedicated to investing in startups there. He's also the author of several books. The most recent one is called The Rise of the Rest: How Entrepreneurs in Surprising Places Are Building the New American Dream. All right, Steve, nice to talk to you. All right. So you've been talking about the need for investment in startups outside of coastal hubs for a decade now, and you've called the pandemic a tipping point. So where are we? What have we tipped into?
Well, first of all, it's great to be back at Brookings, and I give Brookings, particularly Brookings Metro, a lot of credit because they started on this effort of talking about what's happening in different cities, launching the Brookings Metro effort 27 years ago. So, you know, we're kind of late to the party with our efforts here. And I also want to, give a little shout out to Brett Schulman, who'll be on the panel, who's the CEO of Kava, which, as you probably know, he's kind of a hometown hero now. He started just a little over a decade ago. It's just an idea, now a public company with a $4.5 billion market cap. And ultimately, our success in promoting cities like in DC and many other cities around the country, not the traditional tech hubs, Silicon Valley, New York, Boston, et cetera, ultimately is entrepreneurs with great ideas building great companies that create lots of jobs and create a lot of economic value for the community and more broadly. So congratulations, Brett, on a great year, and being named just last week by the Washington Business Journal CEO of the Year. A little hand for Brett Schulman. Now to your question. So We did launch Rise of the Rest just about 10 years ago. It followed an effort I did for the White House at the time, President Obama, called Startup America. It was focused on regional entrepreneurship maybe 13 years ago, something like that. And we said we wanted to shine a spotlight on the entrepreneurs building companies in these various cities, get more capital flowing to these cities, slow the brain drain of people leaving these cities to find opportunity in other places, mostly on the coast. And when we first started talking about it, I could tell a lot of people were skeptical. You could just tell. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Almost a little bit pat me on the back. Good for him to be backing those entrepreneurs in these cities that most people are not paying attention to. And it reminded me a little bit of the early days when we launched AOL, one of the first internet companies, which was 1985, so nearly 4 decades ago. And we're talking about the idea of the internet, and people said, well, that's never going to happen. Like, normal people are never going to get on the internet. And for about a decade, they were right. And then suddenly they were wrong. And everybody realized the power of the internet. I think over the last decade, it started pretty slow, pretty skeptical. I think in the last several years, people have seen some of the companies that have been successful in these cities, see how these cities have been a magnet for talent. We'll talk about some of that in one of the later panels. And that has led people to be a little bit more open-minded, whether they be entrepreneurs about where they start, or whether it be investors about who they back, or mayors and governors how they shifted their economic development focus to not just big companies moving, but new companies starting. And to your question, the pandemic was helpful. Obviously the pandemic was tragic in many respects. I don't want to make light of that, but it did shift how people think about work and life, and shift how the ability to have more flexible work, more remote work, more hybrid work has been helpful to a lot of these cities, because there are a lot of people who felt they didn't have a shot at building something in the startup economy, the tech economy in particular, unless they're in a place like Silicon Valley. And then suddenly they had a little opportunity, and some of the people just did that temporarily and then went back to some of those cities. But a lot of people, once they were there, said, you know what, I want to stay here, and either continue to work remotely for a company somewhere else, or join a company that is more local, or even start a company that's more local. So I do think we'll look back and say that was one of the tipping points. Another tipping point that's been helpful is the public policy shifts. That 10 years ago, despite Brookings' efforts, there wasn't a lot of focus in Congress around regional entrepreneurship, regional economic development, regional job development. And in the last few years, there has been more attention, like the CHIPS and Science Act, but other things as well. So it just feels like momentum is building. Still a lot of work to do. The rest is rising, but slower than we'd like. And so how do we continue to build on the recent momentum and some of the work over the last decade to make sure the next decade's even brighter? Yeah,
one thing you like to point out is that the vast majority of venture capital goes to just 3 states, California, Massachusetts, and New York. Still the case very much. Tell us about your investment philosophy. What are you seeing in the rest that other venture capitalists are not?
Well, I would say that more venture capitalists are starting to look beyond their own backyard. There were people 10 years ago who would say, and there's still some now, but fewer, that if I can't drive to the company, I'm not going to consider investing in the company, which is sort of limiting. There are a lot of great entrepreneurs in New York City, or great entrepreneurs in San Francisco, or great entrepreneurs in Boston, or some of the other places, but probably are a lot of great entrepreneurs in other places. So more people have, some of the coastal funds are focused more on other places. That's been really helpful. And the other data point that even surprised me was in the last decade, 1,400 new venture firms have started in Rise of the Rest cities outside of the big tech hub like San Francisco, New York. About 1,400. And a lot of these are small funds focused on seed investments or venture stage investments. But it bodes well because now more entrepreneurs in more cities have access to some of that initial startup capital than they did before. In terms of our investment strategy, I should say we're Revolution, which is about 2 blocks from here, is focused on the seed stage, the venture stage, and also the growth stage. And so how we think about this, and we were an investor at Kava, for example, at the growth stage. So how we think about this depends on which strategy. We have dedicated teams. On the seed strategy, which is particularly focused on Rise of the Rest, we have made now 200 investments in 100 different cities. And the strategy there is to partner with regional venture firms. that's how we can, kind of cast a wide net, make lots of investments. We don't lead rounds. We don't take board seats. We partner with regional firms. So far, we partner with over 400 venture firms. They help identify promising companies. They bring us into the rounds, and then we connect the entrepreneurs with other entrepreneurs, connect other investors to them, and build sort of a rise of the rest network and host, a lot of summits for investors, summits for the CEOs as a way to kind of create a little bit more network density, for people in places that feel sometimes a little bit lonely. So that is sector agnostic and obviously very early stage because it's a seed strategy. What we do at the venture stage and the growth stage is a little bit different.
How do you convince, these partners? There's lots of people around the country with plenty of money who don't necessarily want to invest in venture. How do you say, okay, you should give this a shot, and then fund these startups after you give them the seed money?
Well, there are different arguments to different people. There are some who are interested in investing in venture because they've seen over the last decade the returns have been pretty compelling, and most portfolios, whether it be a family office or a large institution, has a allocation that has grown over the last decade to private equity generally and venture capital in particular. So for them, it's more of a rather than just invest in a few places like Silicon Valley, there are opportunities typically at lower valuations backing companies in other places. For the people in those places, and there are a lot of them who have accumulated capital, maybe it's a family business, maybe it's real estate, maybe it's something else, and have historically not invested in venture. It's trying to make the case that by backing the entrepreneurs in these cities, you can have the potential to do well from an investment return standpoint, but also be catalytic in terms of your positive impact in the community. And this is one of the things that over a decade ago got me on this journey. The data when I was working on that Startup America initiative was striking and a little sobering to me, which is that essentially all the net job creation in the country was coming from new businesses. Not small business, not big business, but new businesses, companies under 5 years old. I did not know that. And so if new business is so important in terms of job creation and economic development, if you care about your community, no matter where you live, that's one piece that you should be looking at, not just backing philanthropically causes in your city that you care about, but backing the entrepreneurs who might create the new jobs and drive some of the new industries. And the other data point that was interesting and still true is that 50% of the Fortune 500 companies turn over every 25 years. Half. So if you're in a city and you have 2 or 3 Fortune 500 companies, good for you. Statistically, half of them won't be there. The question is not what will you lose some, because you will. The question is, can you launch new ones that replace the ones that you're going to lose? And so it really requires everybody in the community, starting with obviously the mayors and governors, CEOs of the big companies, the foundations, everybody in the universities, everybody in that community saying, we need to make sure we are building a vibrant, growing, thriving community that includes making sure we have a vibrant startup community. That means we have to win the battle for capital, win the battle for talent, and create more of a culture around innovation, risk-taking, and more collaboration that's cross-sector. Otherwise, there's a risk that we will not, kind of win in the next round. We might even lose ground.
Yeah. One challenge for entrepreneurs outside of these big tech hubs can be a lack of a network. Do you tell a young entrepreneur in Baltimore, which is where I live, the greatest city in America, it says so on the benches, that they should take their idea and run with it in Baltimore, or should they move to one of these tech hubs first, make a bunch of connections, and then go back and launch once they know people?
It depends. The general answer is you can now launch anywhere. So rather than assume that you have to be somewhere else, why don't you stay where you are, where you already built a network, already have a certain group of people you can tap into, and probably some credibility in the community you can tap into. Now it is a little easier to raise the capital. It is a little easier to get the attention, so you don't have to move in order to start or scale the company. There might be some companies where there's a particular reason to move, and sometimes it's even moving from a coastal city to another city. One of the companies we backed in Arkansas called Acre Trader was actually, the founder was in San Francisco, and he had this idea of essentially a marketplace for farmland, where people invest in farmland. He decided to be more successful if he was in Arkansas. So there might be a reason you leave Baltimore to go to some other city because a partner in that city will be helpful, or there's some something about that city that has a particular density of talent that understands that particular industry. But the general advice is, if you have an idea, you think it's compelling, rather than just think about it, do it, and rather than feel like you have to move in order to have a shot, you should start from where you are and do it, sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Okay, so what about remote work? What are your startups that you're in the rest of the country? What are they doing? Are they recruiting locally? Are they going back to the office? Are they recruiting from everywhere? Tell me what you're seeing.
All the above, because the 200 companies we have invested in are in 100 different cities, 38 different states. So it's fairly broad. And different companies have different philosophies. There are definitely some companies that are fully remote, that started fully remote pre-pandemic, as well as some that started during the pandemic. They just decided to organize their company around that and build in a lot of technologies to support collaboration and build culture and so forth. There are also quite a number that are fully in the office, and many of them were fully in the office throughout the pandemic. That acre trader I mentioned in Arkansas, they've been basically in the office. They have over 100 employees for most of the past 3 years, when everybody else in the big cities were not going to the office. They were, in part because they had a short commute, like 5 or 10 minutes, in part because they felt it was a safe environment the way they organized it for people to be in. So some are fully remote, and most are, as you'd expect, somewhere in the middle and sort of figuring it out. And everybody's still kind of figuring it out, and people are trying different policies. And some of even the big tech companies that announce policies of fully remote, then reverse them, said there is value to being in the office, and so you're seeing a lot of different experiments happening. It'll take probably another 5 years for it all to settle out. But if I had to guess, we'll have a cluster that is fully remote. We'll have a cluster that is fully in the office. Then we'll have a cluster, probably the larger cluster, that is some hybrid.
Yeah. You've mentioned that in some of these cities there can be a lack of information sharing within the community. You said one thing the bus tour did was it gave people a place to gather in lieu of a big red bus. Was it red? Sorry, okay. What can city planners do? What can they put in place to help create a robust startup ecosystem?
So in the work we've done, and we've been seeing a lot of cities, talking to a lot of people, meeting a lot of entrepreneurs, talking to a lot of entrepreneurs over a fair number of years. There's a bunch of things that need to be focused on. There's not like one thing if you nail it, but if you try to simplify it, the three buckets that I think are super important is talent. You've got to win the battle for talent. And most rise and rest cities in the last several decades have been losing the battle for talent because they did not have a thriving startup ecosystem. So people growing up there, going to school there, who wanted to participate in that, the innovation economy, felt they had to leave. That's winning that battle. So people growing up or going to school and graduating, are staying instead of leaving. And even winning the battle, people who left, getting some of them to boomerang back is critically important. And there's been progress in most cities. You look at the graduations in a city like Pittsburgh with Carnegie Mellon, for example. I'm sure it's true with Johns Hopkins and in Baltimore. More are staying now than were typically staying 10 years ago. So, and the pandemic, as I said, created a little bit of a boomerang opportunity that benefited a number of cities. So that's the battle for talent. The second is a battle for capital. Most companies do need to raise capital to get started, and most people do not have money themselves or wealthy friends to be able to tap into, so you need to have sources of capital, including some local sources of capital, just to get the initial money you need just to take a shot and get going. And that's why having, as I said, the 1,400 new venture firms in these rise and rest cities are so important, and why more coastal venture firms focusing on other places is important. So that's the capital piece. The third piece is actually the hardest. And it's to your question, which is in most of these communities, they don't pay attention to what entrepreneurs are doing. They don't really mentor and support entrepreneurs, and the communities are surprisingly, I'd say shockingly fragmented. And this is the lesson on the bus tour that we didn't know exactly what we were getting into when we started that 10 years ago, but it quickly became apparent that it was not just a bus to get us from point A to point B. It was a bus to convene people, including people living in the same city who had never met each other, and could work together in a collaborative, kind of way. So a lot of it is driving more of that collaboration and network density locally, and encouraging people to recognize that while startups are risky, the entrepreneurs who are taking the risk of starting something should be encouraged. And if something doesn't work, instead of criticizing them, you should say, well, thanks for giving it a shot. Maybe the next idea will work better. Create more of a culture of risk-taking, which everybody in the world associates with America. One of the great things about America is we have this pioneering, can-do spirit. There's more risk-taking, and that's true. But it is not evenly spread throughout America, and trying to build more of that sense of possibility and also drive more of that collaboration and network density is important. And that is, again, I'm very bullish on Silicon Valley. The Rise of the Rest is not somehow anti-Silicon Valley. It's more pro the rest of America. Two things that Silicon Valley does really great, well, actually, they do really great on the talent piece. They do really great on the collaboration piece. They also do really great on building that network density, that sense of collaboration, so people feel kind of connected, and having that sense of wonder, sense of possibility. That let's go for it, let's go big. And if we fail, at least we've taken a big shot, and we'll learn from it and move on. That's not something that is true in most parts of the country. And so that's the piece that when we're in these cities, we spend a lot of time on. What can each of you in the community, whether you're the mayor or running a big company or at a university or an entrepreneur or a venture firm or a startup support organization, what can you do to drive more of that collaboration, drive more of that sense of possibility?
I want to ask about the problems that come with tech growth. Places like Boise and Franklin County, Ohio, and Denver, maybe looking at places like San Francisco and thinking we would love to have that growth, but we don't want those problems. The housing prices, the wealth inequality. What do you think these cities should do to avoid that, to get ready?
Well, this is a complicated question, but I would say the first city we did on our first Rise the Rest tour 10 years ago was Detroit. And Detroit, as probably most of you know, 100 years ago was essentially Silicon Valley, the most innovative city in America. And everybody wanted to be part of the car revolution. Everybody moved to Detroit. It was booming and was the third largest city and the most innovative city in America. Then over a half century, lost 60% of its population. And the year before we came with our bus, the city of Detroit went bankrupt. And the downtown area was abandoned and scary. That's when you have a decline, that's what you see. Investments there, Dan Gilbert, an entrepreneur, Kresge Foundation, working with the mayor, the governor, a bunch of other people, has turned that around. There's still challenges there, but a city that was largely abandoned is now, most of those buildings are full. What comes with that is some displacement, some gentrification. Obviously, if more people are there and buildings that are empty start getting full, prices of rent and other things are starting to go up. But you need that dynamism in order to be successful as a city. So trying to manage that in a smart way and be thoughtful. If you are successful enough to have some big companies launch and scale there or get other companies to move there, you have to recognize it's going to put pressure on housing, it's going to put pressure on traffic, and put pressure on schools and a bunch of other things, and make sure you have a thoughtful plan to be able to provide the services that are necessary. But I personally, I think, seeing some of these neighborhoods that are really struggling, and some of these cities that are really struggling, you now turn it around saying, I'm on the side of trying to create the vitality, the jobs, the economic growth that do lift things up, and the process do create some other challenges, but better to have those challenges than to have the challenge of an abandoned city.
Yeah. Steve, I have one last thing to ask you. So AOL Instant Messenger was a formative part of my high school experience. I understand you got one of the best names, Steve.
Yeah.
Just Steve.
Yeah. If you get in early, you can kind of pick your name. And the first day we launched the first service, which was the fall of 1985, I remember getting online and there were like 5 people online. It was like nobody.
My name included Athena. My sister who's here, her name was Raindrop 17, I believe.
Well, now that you're disclosing, what did you do on? Were you behaving, or were you one of those problematic? We had these terms of service, had to kick some people off. I have to go back and check your record.
It would go like we would have these. I'd have really late night conversations that I saved. Steve. My point is, you founded America Online in the '80s. It really came of age in the '90s. What lessons do you take from that experience and try to pass on to these entrepreneurs?
A bunch. One is that revolutions usually happen in evolutionary ways, and it usually takes 10 years to have an overnight success. Occasionally you get lucky, but most of them are. What I mentioned with Brett and Kava, it's more than a decade before they really got the traction. So there are a few cases of overnight successes. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook is a good example. It was kind of like a dorm room startup that a year later was a global phenomenon. Good for him. That's not the way it works for most people. And so that requires a certain degree of perseverance. Another is in almost every sector, particularly the companies that are going to be launched in the next 10 or 20 years, it's not just about what you do internally, it's the partnerships you form around your company. Strategic partnerships are going to be increasingly important in most sectors, and it ties in with being at Brookings. Policy is going to become increasingly important. Most of the sectors, whether it be healthcare or food and agriculture or transportation or new technologies like AI, have a policy angle to them. So you have to understand that and respect that. And the final one, which is the obvious one, is it's not about you. It's about your team. And if you have the right team working together in the right ways, really anything is possible. If you don't have the right team, I'd argue kind of nothing is possible. Entrepreneurship is a team sport, and sometimes I worry we celebrate the entrepreneur too much and not the broader founding team. So those are some of the takeaways.
Steve Case, CEO of Revolution.
All right, thank you all.
We had to do some strategic arranging to make sure that the matching costumes are on either end of this. So please appreciate the visuals there.
I like that a lot.
I'm just waiting to see how you cross your legs. Thanks so much to Steve and Stephanie for kicking us off and getting some of the big ideas out there. I'm Jennyschutz. I'm a senior fellow at Brookings Metro. I focus mostly on housing and land use. So we are going to start diving into some of the specifics that were brought up in the fireside chat, particularly what happens to real estate markets in areas that see these sudden surges in growth. We have a fantastic panel of speakers today. So we have Mayor Lauren McLean from Boise, Idaho. We have Jason Feud, who is the CEO and co-founder of Placemaker, and that's Placemaker without an E before the final R. My spell check keeps trying to change that one. And Martha Galvez, who is the executive director of the Housing Solutions Lab, which is part of NYU's Furman Center. And I'm not going to give you a ton of background on their organizations because they're going to start off by telling us a little bit about what their organizations do and what role they play in sort of the changing real estate markets. So Mayor McLean, let's start with you. Boise has been in many ways sort of the poster child for the rapidly growing city outside of the coasts. I don't know if there's a trope everywhere that people from California are wrecking real estate in the rest of the country, but Boise is one of those states that drew a lot of people moving in, even before the pandemic, but particularly since then, and really remarkable increases in housing prices. What does that look like from the standpoint of your long-term residents? How does that feel on the inside? And what kind of concerns or issues are you hearing from your constituents?
Sure. I was just on a plane last night and a woman from Georgia said, all these Californians are coming into my town of Beaufort. I was like, really? So yes, I think it's everywhere. I'm Lauren McLean, Mayor of Boise. And yes, our city is growing. And so, especially, it was growing before the pandemic, but in the last 3 years, 4 years, even more so. And so for long-term residents, we're feeling it. Like, we're feeling the pressures of growth. We're feeling what I would call a coastal market, where housing affordability and housing prices don't match the wages of locals. And yet we're also experiencing, while we think often about it as challenges, really the opportunities that come with that. And so we talk about that a lot too. You know, in Boise itself, I mean, you probably have seen, you know, we're in newspapers and articles all the time. Our housing prices have risen quite a bit. Between 2020 and 2023, we had some of the highest increases in rents in the country. And then for those that want to buy homes from 2020 to the average price to buy a home in 2020 was $330,000. In 2023 or 2022, it was $511,000, so a 55% increase for some Brookings stats, as you say. And so what that means is that folks that, you know, are working locally, have always lived in our city, are really struggling to find a home that they can afford, and they're looking to us and to others to create policies to address the number of homes we have. And then the rents, ultimately the rents is where we can engage from a policy perspective, that they're available to be acquired at.
Great. Martha, you work with lots of different cities, and so you have kind of a good bird's eye view. Give us some larger context for Boise. What are you seeing in other kinds of cities around the country? Is this kind of a common story? Is this an unusual story? What are some of the issues that you're seeing?
Thank you. And so I'm at the Housing Solutions Lab, which is based at NYU's Furman Center, and we work with cities around the country to design and launch and evaluate their local housing initiatives, trying to both understand what cities need help with in terms of their local housing conditions and goals, and then learn from what they're doing and spread the word. Right. So we work with, we prioritize small and mid-sized cities. But work with cities in all sorts of markets, and you know, it's difficult to generalize for everywhere, right? There are places that are losing population and have softer markets, but for the most part, this is a really familiar story, and this is something. I think if there are kind of two things that are coming from a lot of the cities that we're working with, one is that affordability is the hot topic. And it wasn't just a few years ago. And that's coming from the data, the numbers. You know, local housing staff are able to point at the numbers and say, yes, rents are up and, you know, costs are up. But also it's coming from their neighbors, and just like a really visceral, it's in the community, and people are really talking about it, and they're talking about it in very personal ways. They can't find housing. More folks are sinking into unstable housing costs and into homelessness, and there's, you know, visible homelessness in places where it wasn't as extreme as before. Folks are worried about their kids finding homes in their neighborhoods or in their communities at all. There are places that don't have rental housing really, you know, and they're trying to figure out how to really change the dynamics of their market. And I think that's probably the second thing then that we hear related to this is local decision makers trying to figure out how to respond to the urgency that they're hearing in places like Boise. And these are passionate, professional, technical, trained folks, but just can't keep up with the scale of the problem. Right? And especially in smaller places where here in DC and in New York, there's agencies devoted to thinking about housing policy and tools. There might be a couple of people in an office that's trying to grow, but still really trying to grapple with how do you define the problem? How do you define your options? How do you implement things effectively? How do you know when you've done things successfully? So folks are really on the ground trying to learn what to do in response to what they're seeing in the data and on the street with their neighbors. Part of that is learning new things. During the pandemic period in particular, there was lots of revenue streams that were coming through that were, you know, just emergency rental assistance all of a sudden was something that cities were trying to set up around the country. New systems, new programs, new policies under consideration, and then figuring out how to explain them to a nervous and I think we're all operating under a certain degree of trauma, whether it's housing or just in this time that we're living in, folks who are skeptical of their own security, right? So having to try to explain to folks really complicated stuff as part of your job, not just trying to do the complicated stuff. So these are, the story I always fall back on is we had some city leaders from 5 very different places, and the conversation went from the specifics of what they were trying to do and how they were trying to do it to their experiences getting yelled at in high school gymnasiums trying to talk about whatever, right?
I'm sure that's nothing that you're familiar with at all.
So it gets complicated and it gets personal, and that is kind of a common refrain that we're hearing from across the country.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we're going to get into some of the solutions. But before we do that, I want to turn to Jason to give us a little bit of a sense of kind of how the private sector market has been responding. So Placemaker is kind of making a niche by building less traditional kinds of products. So tell us a little bit about the kinds of projects that you're building, the cities that you're working in, and what the changes in demand for space are that are leading your company to do this.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenny. And thanks for having me. I kind of feel like the odd man out up here. So I'm Jason Feud, the CEO of a company called Placemaker. My background is very on the capital side. I worked for a large public REIT. I managed a couple $2 billion of ground-up development, and then started Placemaker, then called Y Hotel. Actually, Steve was an early investor. And to give you a sense of our scale, we'll do about 100 million bookings this year. We're about six years old, so we're one of those companies that found their spot and started growing. We are focused on optimizing real estate for customers. So we're not on the policy side. And what that means is we look to bring together multiple uses and operate them in a tech-enabled way. So think home, hospitality, conference. We bring in partners on co-working. How do you get the absolute highest usage out of a building? What that means to the owners of the building is more money. It's more profitable. What that means to our consumers is we run a very tech-enabled program. So all of our communication is via text unless we call them an edge case, the 20% of people that need to meet us in person. We're on site 24/7. So we blend hospitality, multifamily, conference. We bring co-working in. We run across the country. So we have a bunch in DC, Nashville, we've done San Jose, Miami, Houston, just opened San Antonio, mostly urban markets. We're looking at some resort stuff. And our general approach is how do we deliver a superior customer product and more value to the owners of real estate by bringing together different sets of customers. And one of the biggest things we've seen in this post-pandemic world is the way people work is changing and the way people travel is changing. And housing has got more expensive. And those 3 things come together in a way that has allowed us to build a successful business, and we're still in the growth stage.
Great. Mayor McLean, your city has done what a lot of cities are trying to do and haven't done successfully, which is to update your zoning code. And we've talked some with your housing team. So tell us a little bit about what some of the key features are in your new zoning code, and how is this part of the solution? How do you think about zoning as sort of part of the suite of policies and packages that Martha was talking about?
Sure, and I want to pick up on something Martha said too. I mean, she said everything local is personal. And yes, when we make these decisions and we're having these hearings, we hear from a lot of people. But the solutions are personal too. I've knocked on thousands of doors in the last year talking to residents, and at almost every single one of those conversations I had, it was about the cost of housing. It was, like my husband and I moved to Boise in our early 20s, we could buy a home. These people telling me on their doors. Their kids are in college working in other cities, like my daughter, and they can't come back because they can't afford to live in the city they grew up in. Or, the person that works in the coffee shop down the street that's driving half an hour for affordable housing, which contributes to climate issues and so many other things, and they're further away from opportunity than they should be. So both the setting up solutions that are often difficult in hearings can be personal, but the solutions and the impact are personal, and that's really what has driven us to keep at this. And it's an all of the above strategy. We've actually said, Mitch Weiss will say at Kennedy School, you got to think about possibility government instead of probability government, and we've tried to create a culture of risk within our city to say, okay, look, we got to try everything, and if it doesn't work, we're going to admit that it doesn't work, we're going to change it up, learn from it, and then try something else. If it does work, we're going to bring those things to scale. And so we've tried a whole bunch of things, whether it be crowdsourcing ideas and solutions and now doing pilot projects, creating ordinances and incentives, and then yes, a modern zoning code. And I get a big smile on my face because I'm a total wonk on this stuff. I got started as a parks commissioner and then was on the planning and zoning commission, then was on council, and now I'm the mayor of the city that I love deeply. And zoning impacts everything. It impacts the vibrancy of a neighborhood. It impacts the ability for people to have those magical moments where they run into each other, can share ideas, and then run off with an idea. It creates safe spaces for kids to be able to walk to school and know adults along the way and be able to get to parks. It creates economic opportunity if you can live closer to where you work, and it impacts climate and long-term resilience. And so when I was on Planning and Zoning Commission, I helped write our comprehensive plan, and that was a long time ago. And then on City Council, we didn't pick up the zoning changes that needed to happen because it's tough and it's personal, and you find that like everybody has something to say about it. And then when I was elected and became mayor in 2020, we had a goal of doing it in 2 years. Pandemic hit 2 months later. We slowed it down a little bit because we wanted to make sure we had meaningful public engagement. That policy passed unanimously by our city council in June. We had hundreds of people show up to testify, and it was so interesting to me. One, I love these things because when people show up to testify, you hear what it is that they love about the place that they live in. And for people, that means a whole bunch of different things. And I saw a real age gap in our community. The folks that have been here for a long time, want to keep Boise, Boise. The younger people want to keep Boise, Boise, but have a place to live. And so ultimately, the council passed it unanimously, and it went into effect on December 1st. Some of the highlights in this is it's not like one-size-fits-all policy, and it's a part of a portfolio of solutions. But as I said, I think ultimately it'll be the most impactful one because it's a market-based approach to ensuring that we have a city that is mapped out and meets the vision of our residents. Thousands of people engaged, answered surveys. We went to laundromats and Mexican markets and high school gyms and all sorts of places to hear from folks and get feedback. It does concentrate density, as I like to say, as we grow. Instead of growing out, we got to grow up and grow together. And that's how you keep a vibrant, resilient, and successful community. It maps where we want to see that density along the places that we know need to be transit corridors in the long run. It's a chicken and egg problem. You got to have density. You got to have people living and businesses running in order to support transit. It creates incentives for folks that are going to build with all electricity, so we can help wean ourselves off of carbon-based building. It creates incentives if you're going to engage and actually offer rents that are affordable, market rate, workforce housing rates and below. And it makes it possible as a city to plan to provide infrastructure more affordably. We know where we have a 10-minute walk to a park goal. We know where parks are going to need to be, where police stations need to be, fire stations need to be. And it requires a demonstration that there is enough water to support larger scale developments as our region grows. So what this will do, and we'll have to continually look at it because it just went into effect, but the goal is that it is the blueprint that'll make the map and vision of our city that's vibrant, connected, and filled with opportunity and remains super safe possible.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way to think about that as sort of growth is going to happen whether you plan for it or not. But if you plan for it, then you know where you want it to go and the types of growth to go or not grow if you want to preserve your open space. Jason, I'm curious to hear from you. So, a lot of the way that zoning and planning and land use has traditionally worked is that we separate things out. So we have housing over here and offices over here and retail over here. And even within housing, we have single family residential, and we have apartments and hotels, which are short-term residents someplace else. And your whole thing is we want to blur the lines and we want to mix things to optimize space. So I'm curious, from your perspective, are there zoning rules, building code rules, policies that make it hard for you to do the kind of integrated work that you do? If you were going to pick sort of a couple of things that you'd like cities to do to make your sort of project work better or easier, what would you focus on?
Yes. I mean, hearing the half-decade experience to make a change to the zoning code, and that being fast and effective is exactly what makes it difficult to move more quickly. The first building I built, not at our company, we broke ground on it in 2012. It delivered in 2015. And when we built it, it was in an area near here called Pentagon City. And we said, okay, well, the people of Pentagon City is kind of not that exciting relative to this this area called Clarendon. So we're like, there's going to be a space and rents. While we were building it, Uber became a thing and completely changed the dynamic of a $200 million building while we were constructing it. And there was no way that, real estate building doesn't move fast. Real estate zoning and building codes don't move fast. So to have something that's that large and physical move at the pace it does when technology and the way we work is evolving, I think obviously creates issues. In our business, we have two products. One's called a pop-up hotel. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's kind of like a carnival. Someone builds a 400-unit apartment building. They deliver it all at once. And then we take 150 units, we furnish them, and we run a pseudo-hotel out of the vacancy. And then about 20 units fill a month because that's about how many people move in. It's a person a day. And then as it catches us, we leave. And so what we do is we activate the building, we de-risk the development, we generate millions of dollars of free cash flow. The zoning folks love it because it's temporary. The building code folks lose their mind because it's not a hotel. And even though it's a concrete building with sprinklers and there's been no multiple fatality in a sprinkler building that wasn't like a terrorist attack, they're like, well, people may not know where they're going. And so we spend hours, and there's deals we don't do because we have to change alarms and a bunch of other stuff. There was a city I won't name that said to us, hey, you need to have more accessible units. I'm like, okay, we can add some more accessible units. It's more public facing. And we said, well, look, the biggest units are on the penthouse. So we're going to put all of the accessible units on the penthouse. And they're like, well, there's a requirement that there be dispersion. And I was like, dispersion? Well, isn't the spirit of that so that we don't put accessible units in bad spots? These are the penthouse units. They all have their own balconies. And they're like, dispersion's dispersion. So either do it or don't. We didn't do it. So on the pop-up side, it's a building code thing for us. That's about 20% of our business. The other 80% is a product we call flex living. And that's an apartment-style building where in perpetuity you can live or stay. And that's where we see the world going, that blurring of the lines. The building code folks don't mind because we'll spend the $500,000 million to go upgrade everything. We'll move walls, we'll change things, we'll put a bunch of stuff in that we don't have to put in, but we have to put in. But then the zoning folks lose their mind. And they're like, well, how can this be both? And you're like, well, because people stay in people's homes and people live in hotels. That's how it's going to be both. And if someone's zoning code doesn't allow for it, it is very difficult for them to say, well, we're going to go do this. Like, we need an act of the mayor. We need an act of, and it's like, well, this might take us 2 years to figure out. And so that's what we butt in on the zoning side. I will say that when a building is being built anew, it's the easiest because it's going to take 2 years to get it approved anyway. So you have the time to go work through that. But when you want to move faster in existing inventory that was already built, some cities it is very difficult, and some cities it's really seamless. And that directs where we spend our time today.
Got it. We want to make sure that the audience gets a chance to ask some questions. So I let you guys think, and I'm going to do one super fast lightning round. So each of the panelists gets 15 seconds to answer this one. We're coming up on the end of the year, and it's time to make New Year's resolutions. For each of your organizations, what is the one thing that you are focused on that would be a win for next year?
Successful implementation of a brand new modern zoning code.
Love it.
Making money. So we're in the business of moving from spending money to making money.
Nice.
I think we'd like to help more places make progress, like in Boise.
Awesome. All right, audience questions. So those of you who are here in the audience in person can raise your hands. We're going to go ahead and take, I think, 2 questions, and then we'll let the panelists answer. Are we taking questions online or focus on the in-person? In person, excellent. All right here. And we have mic runners, so wait until the mic comes. And if you can just tell us where you're from and keep the question short and pointed.
Hello there, my name is Ujjwala Pluri. I'm from U.S. Customs Office of Green Trade and Sustainability, and my question is regarding the circular economy, green cities. Many countries like India, China, Europe, have been implementing the green cities model to create more sustainable infrastructure. What steps are the cities here in the United States taking, and also, in terms of creating those living spaces to conform more to that, to meet those sustainability targets set by the UN?
Great question. And then we have one more here.
So I was just researching flights to Boise. I'm looking at February, because right now it's expensive. It's $110 to get a one-way flight, and it's like 20 hours to get there. I mean, I'm comparing that to Chicago, $50, Miami, $50, so cheap to get there, so less time. Same thing with Amtrak, like Amtrak is $50 to get to New York from DC here. If I buy it right now, it's just, how do you, convince young people, especially in terms of travel, because house living is different, but then you have to come back, go back other places. So in terms of travel, how can you be guys cheap, especially both,
And any of you who want to take the sustainability question?
I'll take a shot at that. So there's two things. There's nothing more efficient than using what you have. So we're in the optimized utilization game. I'd say that I'd love for customers to deeply care about sustainability and it to be priced in. There are certain cases where that is the case. So for an office building, office tenants will care about that. There are certain places where it's not the case. In cities, a lot of people are so price sensitive to their home, they won't pay $10 more in rent for a building that's even more energy efficient and costs them less money. And so I think it's the place of policy on, when it comes to environmental sustainability for government to set the bar so that everyone has to meet it together because consumers are not in most areas. And then I think it's kind of also the place of policy and government to allow for the best use of buildings and not have empty office buildings, not have empty apartment buildings and retail spaces because of a code that was set 20 years ago.
Sure. I mean, I'll answer the two questions at once. First off, I actually think that if you look around, private business is much further ahead on climate work and sustainability than government is, because shareholders expect it, because they're already pricing the risk related to carbon into the value of a company. So more and more, that's going to drive decisions that are being made. So I look at it that way as the mayor of a city. My shareholders are residents. If we're going to make decisions and build buildings, we got to make them so that we are saving the money in the long run. We are only building all electric buildings now because of the partnership that we have with our power company to provide us clean electricity. Our goal was by 2030 for municipal buildings. We're going to beat that probably by 4 years. We just announced some new guidelines in partnership with tech companies and the state to be able to build new solar and actually purchase that in advance so that we've got those prices guaranteed. Our goals are to be for the city to be fully powered by clean electricity by 2030. As I said, we beat that, and citywide by 2035 in partnership with our power company, and then to be carbon neutral, city government 2035, take those learnings and make it happen by 2050 for the community. It'll be tough, especially that last 10 to 15% is the hardest because you have policy change and things. Our residents passed at 81% 2 years ago a Clean Water and Climate Action Water Bond, $570 million bond that's allowed us actually to start water renewal facilities to provide water reuse to attract companies whose shareholders want them to price climate resilience into their work. And so they come to Boise and reuse water. Companies like Micron and other clean tech manufacturing and fabricators are looking at that. And then we have that for our residents as well, as an example. We're doing a lot there. Because in the long run, we want our region to be a winner. I want my city to be a winner. We got to be ready for the changing world. It'll create job opportunities as well as save money for residents in the long run and create opportunities for companies. Yes, for folks that have always lived on coasts, you can get to a city really quick and you think it's normal to just use one airplane to get somewhere or one train to get somewhere. My husband and I chose a flyover city in our early 20s. We were on our way to Seattle. He was looking at a job at Adobe. I was looking at law school. We visited Boise, fell head over and heels with the city we call home 26 years ago. And so we've never known anything other than taking 2 or 3 airplanes to get places, to see our family and everything else. As a city, just a little wonkiness other than Fort Myers a couple years ago. We had more direct flights per capita than any city of our size in the country. And our airport growth and flight growth is well above pre-pandemic levels and just off the charts. We are working on getting a flight to DC. If only we could get that rider changed at DC National, we'd like a flight. In theory, there's a mileage limit, but every state around us has one. We don't. We're working on that. And then you can get to Boise a little easier. You have to talk to the airlines about price. The people are choosing Boise to live just as my husband and I did 26 years ago because of the value and life that it offers. And now more than ever the opportunity that it offers. And so we'll keep plugging away, make sure we're doing the right things from a sustainability and climate resilience perspective, make sure it's easy for our residents to get to see their family, and then for companies to send their employees where they need to be to get to work. And it's a work in progress.
I think we have time for maybe one more quick question. Hannah?
You mentioned Uber and how it disrupted your business. For any sort of investment decision, how do you guys de-risk or mitigate the risk of technology disruption?
I guess we assume that things are going to evolve. And so, whatever the best laid plans. One of the biggest evolutions you're going to see happen to real estate, two big things. One is the number of humans that are required to physically be there is going to change because so much is going to be able to be done remotely. And that means your cost basis changes. So that's kind of bucket one. The other really big thing is with that also comes AI. And so I would say today we use machine learning and a bunch of other stuff through third-party companies. We don't have our own in-house team. But what we've done, I think a pretty tremendous job of doing is collecting every single piece of data on every single interaction via text, email, arrival, experience, all of it. Because our expectation is at some point in time, we're going to be using algorithms to gobble it up and make us more efficient. We're just not ready today to make that scale of an investment. Because I said before, we want to make money. And that's a lot of money. So I think it's about, people like to say future-proofing. I think it's about hedging your bets a little bit. We're going to we spent hundreds of thousands, $1 million extra to make sure that we have the tools in place as the world evolves. And we constantly debate what's going to change. But the reality is sometimes you just got to get slapped in the face. So you can't solve for every situation. And if if you solve for every problem, you run out of money and you don't build an effective business. So I think, we're hedging a little bit. And then, we're in the ocean, we're on the waves, we're taking the ride.
Well, now that we're all thinking about the cameras and the recording devices that are monitoring our every move and our every word all the time, I think that's actually a perfect segue to our next panel, where we're going to get a little bit more into some of the tech details and some of the labor market changes. So please thank our speakers for joining us.
Well, great. How's everybody doing? Hope you're all heading towards a great holiday here. So I'm Mark Muro, Senior Fellow here, working on the intersection of people, place, and technology. Our second panel is going to look into ways that the current soft landing that we're getting supposedly in the economy also includes some variations, some other things going on as well. So we want to dig into this. This panel looks at places, but also people who are working especially on labor market issues. So just a few trends. I'm going to throw out a few trends to kind of orient us and dig right in. First, we should know by and large, we're experiencing a soft landing, a pretty benign environment in some ways. The job market's been cooling off as the Fed wants. But in general, the labor market remains surprisingly strong in a lot of places in the country. Unemployment rates are near five-decade lows, even if openings are declining. So it's a pretty benign situation, but we'll hear from people like Brett on what he thinks. But meanwhile, there's some other disparate local trends that we think are interesting. One is tech clustering, or declustering to an extent, after a hyper-clustering in the Bay Area throughout the whole last decade, with all kinds of people waiting for something to change, it finally has. We're seeing a slight easing of that concentration in the Bay Area, but other places that we're calling rising stars are really doing quite well. Think of Nashville, Dallas, Houston, Denver, Provo, several of those places represented here today. So remote work, cheaper costs in new places, tech's new era of efficiency after having become inefficient during a period here is carving out a different environment. So I think, we got to watch how it emerges. I think as Steve suggested, but let's hear about it from the ground. Investment patterns are shifting, meanwhile. A burst of both private and public investment is changing dynamics in individual places. Private investment on the front, White House data documents firms' recent investments of $628 billion of major advanced industries facilities all across the country. So dozens of places receiving some material investment. We'll be curious to see how that's touching down. And then the government's embrace of what we're calling place-based industrial strategy means that there are deliberate investments in key places that clearly have often a technology dimension, as I think we're going to hear from Kevin and Michelle, who are on the receiving end of some of that. So these places are going to be tested by maybe authentically faster growth continuing. So I want to just jump into the panel here right off. We've got a great group here. First, to my left, Kevin Boise is County Commissioner of Franklin County, Ohio, in the Columbus area, and therefore resides in the middle of managing an interesting new surge of growth, opportunity, and labor dynamics. Michelle Hadwiger, further to my left, is Director of Global Business Development for Governor Jared Polis in Colorado, and is immersed in a wide array of economic development activities there. Meanwhile, Craig Lewis is the founder and CEO of GigWage, a venture-backed startup serving the demands of the changing workforce and the need for modern payment tools to support it. Craig's based in Dallas, so he'll give us a Dallas perspective as well as a labor market view. And then finally, Brett Schulman needs no further introduction, is mastermind of Kava Group. So let's get to it. Kevin, knowing your region's heartland credentials and interest in tech, I wonder whether you're seeing a quickening development in the region already, and how that's being received. How is managing the development of, in one case, a $20 billion Intel plant been going, and what has that meant for the region?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm kidding. So first of all, let me say thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about Franklin County, Ohio, and how it's impacting not just Central Ohio, but quite frankly, the entire state of Ohio. We were fortunate enough to be on the receiving end of a long process to acquire a Intel semiconductor development plant. And this, we believe, is the catalyst to a new Central Ohio. Central Ohio is already thriving and growing. We've been growing over the last 3 decades. A decade ago, we were Franklin County was about 1.2 million people. Today, it's almost 1.4 million people. And so we're seeing growth at every level in every sector of our economy. The Intel plant is a game changer because it has it's made Franklin County be regional oriented. And connected to the regional orientation is public transit connections, housing strategy that links communities that otherwise would not be linked together. It puts the Ohio State University in play, not just as a national university, but as a catalyst to being able to sort of bring it all together. And so while we don't know the true impacts of what this new Intel plant means for Ohio, you can only venture to guess that it's boundless. From all of the employment opportunities that will come as contractual opportunities with Intel, but also Intel plant itself. I mean, the plant itself will be 3,000 new employees to the region. And it's not even in Franklin County. It's in Licking County, which is the county next to it, but it's a rural county. And so we've got the infrastructure that's going to support it, to allow it to be built, to allow it to grow. The workers that are building it today live in Franklin County because the housing is not yet developed in Licking County. And so we're already starting to see the impacts of what will be really the cornerstone, not just for Central Ohio, but for the state of Ohio.
Great, kind of setting up a new infrastructure, a new framework. Yep, Michelle, the Front Range has been a winner throughout the last decade, at minimum. What's happening now in your region as far as new developments? Are things changing there? And is the growth consensus still in place there?
Sure. Thanks, Mark. So for Colorado, respectively, we in the 2010s, we saw 40 to 60,000 net in-migrants moving into the state, which was 2 times the population increase versus the rest of the U.S. as a whole. So we are experiencing what most of these superstar cities is that fast growth, and how do you mitigate the effects that come with fast growth. And for Colorado particularly, because our industry base is more indexed in the knowledge-based economy, the STEM share of employment is much higher, in fact, 5th in the country, the second most highly educated workforce in the country, 8 industries that have grown year over year in terms of employment growth in highly sought after sectors like aerospace, bioscience, information technology, energy and natural resources. So Colorado has always typically been the last state to enter a recession, the first to exit, because of this diverse portfolio of interesting industries. And then to that extent, we are seeing that growth coupled with our legacy of a startup community and innovation, 33 federally funded laboratories, tier 1 research institutions, and then that in-migration that was coming to Colorado was coming highly educated. So we're one of the least native states in the country. We are importing most of our talent to keep that ranking as the second most highly educated state in the country. And what that does is it brings this unique kind of concentration of diversity of thought. So coupled with our diversity of industry, you've got this thought process that comes from everyone bringing their new ideas to the state of Colorado, which I think has accelerated our innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem. So what's happening now based on that fast growth is the fact that we are well positioned for this new industrial policy revolution. So with the CHIPS and Science Act, we're competing for an NSF engine for climate technology. We're competing for a quantum initiative for the EDA Tech Hub, which we have been designated as, and we will find out our final award against Chicago, hopefully in February on the quantum initiative. We're also seeing our semiconductor industry, really fast growth, not the large fab facilities necessarily, but we've got the whole value chain in the semiconductor industry, packaging, R&D, chips, and fab production, manufacturing. So for Colorado, we are seeing still significant growth, and that growth has come with constraints, housing, transportation infrastructure, crime, all of the things that the big cities are experiencing as a result of that rapid growth. So I don't think much has changed other than the fact that we are seeing a slower growth in population and then a slight dip in our venture capital investment coming into the state, although we still rank in the top 10 for venture capital coming in spite of our 5.8 million people. It's quite significant to have $5.8 billion in VC coming into a non-coastal community in a city or state of our size. So I'll stop there.
We'll circle back to some of the tensions. Craig, give us a sense of what your startup does and why Dallas has been a promising place for it. I don't think Dallas has always had the reputation as an inclusive techie ecosystem, but it sounds like it really is functioning that way now for you.
Sure. No, thanks. I'm Craig J. Lewis. I'm the founder and CEO of Gig Wage. I know we've got a bunch of people online, and then for the people that are in person, you ever been paid before? You like to get paid? I told my mom I was really proud that I'm the guy that pays people. So what GigWage is, it's a software platform that helps businesses pay, manage, and support independent contractors, freelancers, gig workers, contingent workers, the informal economy, any number of names that it may go by. But we've built a comprehensive end-to-end platform to help businesses manage the new way that people are often choosing to work. Millennials are the largest generation in today's workforce. Gen Z is entering the workforce with vigor, and they want to work how they want, when they want, where they want. But also boomers and Gen X are also realizing that, maybe their Social Security isn't so safe anymore, and they may need to earn extra money to make ends meet or maintain a lifestyle. And so we've built a platform that no matter if you're a small business, a technology platform, or a large enterprise, if you're leveraging this new way that people work, you need the tools and technology to do that. That goes onboarding, background checks, instant ID verification, instant payments, on-demand payments, taxes, compliance, and all the financial and HR services that you might possibly need to manage this workforce so that they can be paid how they want, when they want, and where they want. And I chose to build the business in Dallas. The true answer is my mother lives there, and she's a phenomenal cook. And so that's the real answer. But the answer I like to give on these types of stages is it's a wonderful, we have our challenges in Texas in general. I'm sure you guys are aware of some of them. But from a business perspective, it's a phenomenal place, always has been. I like to look back to the 1930s when we had the East Texas oil boom, and that's where a lot of that wealth was created in real estate, in telecom, oil and gas, very entrepreneurial city. When I was kind of making the rounds, raising money in Dallas, a lot of people told me that people wouldn't understand software. It's too risky. You can't touch it. And my retort to that was, well, we used to go around pumping holes in the ground, hoping some stuff gushes up. So the risk appetite must be pretty good here in Dallas. And so I realized we do have an appetite for risk. We are entrepreneurial. And so, a lot of the policies that we have been built and organized around building robust businesses. And it was just a matter of trying to tap in and understand how that is. And so technology, the last thing I'll say about this is, as you've seen second and third generation of wealth start to kind of take the helm, some portion of that allocation or that wealth management, the grandsons, granddaughters are understanding that technology can impact the patriarch or matriarch's business, oil and gas, technology has impact there. And so they've become a lot more acceptant to technology because it's impacted their legacy businesses. And so companies like mine have benefited from that.
Yeah, so there's more going on in Dallas than people have realized for a while, it sounds like. So Brett, you must have an acute feel for labor market trends. Can you quickly remind folks, what you're learning about shifting workforce trends and currents across the country, and what seems to be universal? Are there variations that you see in particular places as you build the Kava chain?
Yeah, Mark, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'd go back to 2015. So we run a Mediterranean fast casual concept. Our mission is to bring heart, health, and humanity to food. And it was founded by, originally in a single full-service restaurant, about 45 minutes from here out in Rockville, Maryland, called Kava Meze, by my three partners and co-founders who were sons of Greek immigrants, really putting their modern heritage and culinary, modern spin on their family's heritage and culinary. So we wanted to bring that to the world because we thought it was this unique cuisine where taste and health unite that had this incredibly broad appeal. And so we did it, opening our first fast casual in 2011. And then in 2015, when we had built a presence here in the DMV, we were looking to expand. And that's actually when we met Steve, and really appreciate his support and belief in supporting entrepreneurs outside the big three cities, and the belief in what we were doing. And we raised our first round of institutional capital to grow outside the country, or outside the DMV. And so we started to look around the country. And what we were identifying back then, I think, has only been amplified by the pandemic. And those were trends that we were seeing, that people were starting to move from the big coastal cities, for quality of life and cost of living reasons. You were even seeing telework back then. And you were seeing people start to move to the suburbs, millennials starting to have families. And they were moving to the suburbs and the Sun Belt is what we were seeing. So we embarked on this coastal smile strategy, as we called it, down in the Sun Belt. We acquired a company that was public that was struggling. Actually, it was a lot larger than us, really as a real estate play to accelerate that because we were seeing this population movement. And then you had the pandemic come along. And the pandemic only really served as an amplifier or magnification of that. And so then when you layer on the digitally enabled workplace that we're currently living in, you're starting to see post-pandemic some persistent trends that are really becoming permanent trends. And it's the idea, and I'll give a little bit of an example through how we operate as a company in a minute, but it's the idea, I think Steve talked about, the bucket of hybrid work, and we're all kind of feeling our way down a dark hallway. But what I think you see that playing out is this idea of super cities that we had in the early 2000s have now become cities that are part of larger networks. Of these second-tier cities are now becoming just part of a network. So you think about some connectivity we're seeing, whether that's New York and Miami, or whether it's Austin and San Francisco, or Los Angeles and Nashville. And so you're seeing people migrate between cities. You're seeing companies start to populate in different cities and spread out their presence. And so that corporate campus or that vertical tower is becoming a bit obsolete, a bit more challenged. And you're seeing companies start to do what we're doing. So we have what we call our collaboration center here in DC. And that's kind of our hub. And then we have a few spokes. We have a presence in Plano, Texas. So I agree with Craig, by the way. Texas is our largest state by restaurant count. So a lot going on down there in Texas. And we also have an office in Brooklyn. And then we have a remote layer beyond that. And I think you're seeing a lot of companies adapt to that to be able to deliver a work experience for the modern worker, the modern professional. Because, there's a lot of things, a lot of generational moments that have happened over the last 20, 25 years that have caused people to rethink what they're working for, how they get up in their day, and where they're navigating in the world. And so they want that flexibility. But what we've also seen post-pandemic is they want that connection. So they want both. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want in person, but they want remote. And what that's led to is this rise of the rest increase in cities like these superstar cities or these other places that really deliver lifestyle or quality of life or cost of living. And then we've also seen this effect around cities called the donut effect, where there's some real challenges in the urban cores that we're going to have to figure out. And urban cores are starting to evolve, at least from what we're seeing, from predominantly places of work to places of connection. So when we look at the cities and the downtowns that are thriving, they've got entertainment, they've got nightlife, they've got restaurants, they've got sports activities, they have tourism to complement some of the return to work that we've seen. But then you see a lot of the residential now more populating in that inner circle around cities. So that's created this dynamic that's kind of spread the wealth more around the country. We operate now, our cuisine has a very broad appeal, which I talked to earlier, and that allows us now to operate in 24 states and the District of Columbia, coast to coast. We operate in cities and in suburbs and also in small towns. And so it gives us a really good coverage area to see kind of how people are navigating and populating around the country and moving. And that's what we've seen. We've seen people move more toward areas around cities and also to these, what we used to call second-tier cities, that we think are kind of becoming more prominent parts of a larger network of cities.
Really interesting broad gauge view there. So let's go back now and go fairly rapidly, but each of you naming a critical area that you think your region or your activities are having to learn about. I wonder, Kevin, you alluded to some real tensions around infrastructure, maybe workforce. I'm wondering what to you are the 1-2 top things that these new developments in this period are really forcing on communities.
Mark, you started with me and you gave all my answers, so I'm not sure I can add to that. But I think at the heart of it is infrastructure, and that's very significant. When you think for Central Ohio, which was not built to accommodate 1.4 million people, even at the stage we are today, we are projecting, based on census data, we're projecting a growth over the next 20 years of another 1 million people. And so already our infrastructure is overwhelmed, and it's not just highways and roadways. It's the plumbing infrastructure. It is the technology infrastructure. It is the it's how we are building in terms of millennials being the driving sector of our population these days. And so we're behind in every facet, and there's really no way to catch up. And so it's a double-edged sword. The growth is a tremendous boon for our county, but at the same time, there's no real solution to an immediate fix on all of these things. And the housing, someone mentioned it earlier, the housing is something that is terrifying, because you have to be able to provide a place for folks to live, work, and play. And living is a core to that quality of life. And so these are things that we're not only deeply enthralled in our planning process now, but those are financially significant. So it's not like we can just do it and it's there. They take a long time and they cost. And by the time you do that infrastructure improvement, you're already outdated. And so we're having to think of it, quite frankly, in a regional sense, where usually we're just focused on our circle of Franklin County.
Yeah, or historically that might not have been the way.
Correct.
Yeah. Michelle, I wonder what are some of the management responses you think your region has learned or needs to learn to facilitate the kind of, continued high-value growth that you're talking about. Do you think you're hitting the mark? What are the real pressure points now?
Sure. So I think we are in some ways, and we aren't in others. I would say that the ways that we are addressing housing and workforce, I think, are two of the biggest headwinds that we face, just like any other major city. But for the workforce stuff, I think we're really focused on new models of education, certificate stacking, apprenticeship models, upskilling, reskilling, which we think is extremely important as the federal government unleashed all of this money, which is a really great thing. But the demand for those skilled workers went up exponentially and all at once, and every state was competing for the same talent pool that frankly wasn't trained to do the things that we need them to be trained to do. And so I think we're really focused on that. And then on the housing side, we're focused on, we created a middle income housing authority to have the state issue tax-free bonds to help with the middle income housing. We also assessed a incremental 0.1 state income tax rate for affordable housing. We used most of our federal funding for recovery on housing and housing initiatives and proposition. So I think housing and workforce primarily, but for Colorado, we're an aging state. So most of our population is actually in the 65 and plus, but we're also a place where millennials and really young dynamic workers want to be. So the support services and wraparound services that are required to meet the demands of the younger generation, and also the support services for our growing and aging population are an interesting dynamic that I don't think we quite have figured out yet. So I think that those housing, workforce, and then changing population trends are the three main headwinds we'd face.
Yeah, pretty heavy task, it sounds like. But
sure.
The Craig, what do places need to learn about supporting a labor market in a way that is inclusive, that is efficient, that works for people?
Yeah, the gig economy is, again, I say that in its broadest terms. People call it a lot of things, gig wage, so we call it the gig economy. It is fundamentally shifting everything. So people think about, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, DoorDash, or whatever it may be, but the vast majority of this labor force is not, an app-based driver. My dad was a truck driver for years, and he was an independent contractor, drove over the road 18-wheelers. We service today 600,000 different workers on our platform and growing pretty quickly, and it's very agnostic and very horizontal. But it's not just a work thing that cities, states need to consider. So think about this. If I'm an independent worker, everything in my life has been built around traditional employment. So if I want to get a mortgage, I don't actually have the work history and profile that the underwriters actually want to see. But I'm literally earning the same amount of money that my counterpart in a W-2 position may be earning. So what do I do when I want to get a house? What do I do when I want to take some sick time? All of these issues start to get impacted if we're not paying attention to and taking the gig economy seriously. You're talking about $1.5 trillion of economic stimulus last year alone in the U.S. Somewhere around 70 million people did this type of work. Now, you may be saying, no way. But the people you work with at your traditional job on nights and weekends may be earning additional income this way. So half of the workforce, we're talking about 140, 150 million people, have earned what we call some type of 1099. And they may do it any number of ways. Again, for every W-2 job you can think of, every traditional job, there is a gig counterpart to that, right? Some of the jobs I can't even probably talk about on a Brookings stage. But it's a very, very serious thing, and I don't think a lot of people, a lot of cities, a lot of jobs, a lot of employers are taking it seriously enough. And so we're, at Gigwage trying to do a lot to continue to educate people on what we call the independent era. We're moving from this employer era where people are tied to companies into where now you're looking at consumers that are consuming work. Talent is being matched up to opportunities to earn that are alternative, and it has massive impacts throughout our economy. So I would encourage people to, if you're not already taking advantage of the gig economy, start to understand how it may impact whatever particular area you're focused in.
Yeah, really interesting. So we'll start thinking about your own questions for a minute here from now. But I want to ask Brett in the meantime, what have you learned about managing, the kinds of large numbers of workers you need for a CAVA nationwide? I mean, what are some of the, insights that you're learning about people?
Yeah, I think, it's what's been part of our DNA and how we built our business is that we talk about growing people personally and professionally. And I think in today's world, people are looking to leadership for us, not just in their professional life, but in their personal life, because some of our traditional institutions are struggling to provide that. So it's thinking about them as a holistic person. We call it the human deal framework. So thinking about their benefits, thinking about not just their baseline compensation, and then thinking about also where we open these restaurants. I think Mayor McLean touched on this, the coffee shop worker who can't live closer than 30 minutes from where they work. And I think that's a big challenge for a lot of cities, especially growth cities. Public transportation and housing that allows workforce populations to be within proximity of where their available work is. So we look at all that when we look at how we're going to expand into market and what kind of availability that is. And then also, as we hire, how can we support our team members to have support in those areas as they try and succeed not only in our four walls of our restaurant, but beyond the four walls of our restaurants.
Great. Good. Well, do we have some questions here? Anybody want to try these guys out on anything? Pretty satisfied with their answers, I guess. Yeah.
Can you all talk about the friction between blue-collar versus white-collar jobs? Because it seems like blue-collar jobs are available, but white-collar jobs, according to the jobs report, not as much. And that, I guess they're more prone to layoffs and AI and being displaced.
You want to take a shot?
Why do you keep calling on me first? I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I'm right next to you. I want to change my seats. I don't know that I would describe it as friction because, so let me back up. As the county, we have to think about all types of jobs, and not just because of the income tax, but because of the sales tax and the way of living. And so we've created programs that are trying to fuel our blue-collar jobs, the construction trades, and all of the jobs that are linked to that. For example, even with the Intel site being developed, we are underperforming in the labor market because it is an intensive type of project. But I think it's also a function of how we are raising the current younger generations. And so I don't think the conflict is necessarily in our lives, but probably more in the lives of everyday people. I also am an entrepreneur myself. I started a small bank, and so I know that we're having as tough a challenge to recruit for those white collar jobs and have people in banking and finance as it is for the construction trades, to try to find folks that are willing to do those types of jobs or be in that kind of role. So I don't know that it's a conflict on our level. I think it really is something that is happening at a very granular level, or maybe at the root level in our community, in our homes, in our schools, in our neighborhoods. And so I don't know. I would describe it as a conflict of friction as much as both areas, in places that are growing, we struggle to fill the need. And as I think you were saying about Colorado, I mean, it's definitely something in Ohio. In Ohio, last point I'll say is that Columbus, we have to compete with other cities in Ohio. We are competing with Cleveland and Cincinnati and Toledo and Akron. And that in itself is somewhat cannibalistic. And so we're trying to find ways to build a workforce for all of them. And I think that's the only way that we're going to survive our growth spurt that's happened in Central Ohio. I hope that helps.
Yeah, Craig.
Yeah, blue collar, white collar. I don't have a collar, and if I did, it'd be black. Y'all get that? In the gig economy, what we kind of see is, this deal of like knowledge workers and then those that actually carry out tasks. I wouldn't think about it as friction. We think about it as a pendulum. As a technologist, I'm a believer. I'm extremely pro technology, but every time there is a surge in some new technology, some job is on the line, right? But what we consistently see over time is that technology continues to be something that adds to the productivity of people versus completely replacing people. So whether it's on the blue collar side and robots are going to do all of the jobs, or it's on the white collar side and AI is going to take over all of those roles, I don't know that I fundamentally believe that. I think what you will continue to see in economies and in work is areas that are natively designed to become more efficient. They will do it on their own. Technology becomes an accelerant of that. And you'll start to see new jobs created on both sides. So there's a pendulum, and right now, white-collar jobs, again, I don't know if I don't even know if I like using that term anymore, but that's a different panel. Those jobs are under attack, and it feels like there's pressure there. But I truly believe, I don't know if we'll get to some utopian state, but I actually do believe that technology ultimately becomes a productivity tool and an accelerant to those. And so you'll start to see new jobs created on both sides of the collar.
Good. Good.
And I'll just add one last thing, and I'll tie it back into the rise of the rest, is that for Colorado, we've actually been over-indexed on the knowledge side, the STEM-oriented, high-wage jobs, and actually the low-skill, middle-skill had been something that we were missing from our market and trying to develop. And this new industrial policy has actually afforded us the opportunity to capture those. So I think it's a misnomer that these new semiconductor and quantum jobs, they're actually very low-skilled, middle-skilled jobs for a portion of the functions that need to happen. So I think these high areas of technology, when robotics and AI and new enabling technologies come into play, that creates downstream jobs for computer, a number of different things through the multiplier effect, but also creates another subsector of the industries that are required to be highly skilled for us because we have an abundance of natural resources as well. We're taking advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act and the wind production, solar. All of those industries require really highly skilled, low-skilled, middle-skilled workers, and wages are significantly higher in those sectors because they're such in demand. So for us, it's been a good thing.
Well, thanks all. I'm afraid out of time. I want to wrap up our discussion of whatever this emerging new normal is. Not sure we're there yet. I'd like to thank everybody who spoke and helped create the event, help produce the session, including our friends at Revolution. So I'd like to invite everybody here this afternoon to join me outside the auditorium for a small reception. I believe that through these doors. Yes, they're pointing that direction. So good. Well, thanks all, and have a great holiday. Bye-bye.